With us, Hannah Bardell, a business consultant who served 9 years as an SNP MP, Andy McKeever, a director of a strategic communications agency who once worked for the Scottish Conservatives, and the solicitor Cat Headley, who's a former Labour Scottish parliamentary candidate. Well, we welcome to you all, but we heard there from Reform UK. We haven't actually heard that much from them in Scotland, but they think they're going to beat the Scottish Conservatives in 2026, Andy.
And they might. I think we have to... Politics is different. Politics has become different in every country because of last week in the States. And I actually think that for a party like Reform, if they manage to hook on to the right issues that they know in individual cases will potentially excite or at least ignite some people in the country, then we can't rule out a party like Reform having a chance. They got 7% in July. If you get 7% in the Scottish Parliament in every region of the country, you're probably going to get 7 or 8 MSPs. And if they look at something, I mean, you know, she mentioned net zero quite a few times. There is the ability to hook on to some very simplistic net zero messaging. Jacob Rees-Mogg did it the other day. Net zero makes you poor and cold. And you can do that and you can potentially ignite some people. So they could look at some issues. I think they should look at abolishing the Scottish Parliament as an issue for them. There are lots of people who would hook on to that sort of thing and make them...
an advisor's job here.
Listen, I don't want to give them advice either free or paid. I wouldn't want to give them advice. But I think we need to reimagine all the things that we thought were definite about Scottish politics, UK politics and politics in the West more generally. They can do something if they hook on to the right issues. I'm not sure they will, but they could.
Hannah, how worried do you think the other parties should be about the rise of Reform?
I mean, I think it's a concern. There's absolutely no doubt about it. And I mean, it's quite unhinged, some of the stuff that they're coming out with. And when, you know, denying the net zero stuff, I mean, she talks about it, you know, the Reform candidate Helen McDade has talked in the past about immigration net zero, which is a ridiculous idea because we actually have a skills shortage. But they also talk about defunding, you know, our support for in terms of climate change. And so, yes, we will end up poor and cold if we end up with Reform people who are essentially climate deniers. But I think it's really important that we learn the lessons, or we try and at least learn the lessons from what's happened in the US, because Reform are incredibly close to the Republicans. And we cannot just write people off because they have views that we don't agree with. We need to understand. I think those of us who believe in progressive politics on the left and in the centre need to work together as well to think about the challenge that that's going to pose.
Kat, why is their support going up in Scotland at these by-elections, the council by-elections? Because they got 7% of the general election without even having a campaign. They're now running campaigns, aren't they?
I mean, the Reform UK kind of phenomenon as it was in the Scottish election in July was really interesting to see. I mean, there are 23 seats across Scotland where they outpolled the Conservatives, and there's another half a dozen where they came within 100 or so a few hundred votes. Portobello, where I was doing the sample on the night of the election, they were outpolling the Conservatives in Portobello, one of the most kind of right-on bits of Scotland that you can probably find. And I think...
So why is that?
Well, they are a very useful kind of sponge. They really kind of soak in a lot of discontent, dissatisfaction from a wide range of the electorate from across different parties. As she said, actually correctly, I think that they are picking up support from lots of different parties. But at the moment, they don't actually have a view or a policy platform that really makes sense for anything, so they can be about anything.
It's slogan politics.
Sorry?
You know, it's slogan politics, and that, unfortunately, it won Brexit. You know, it appeals to people. It has appealed to people in America. And so I think, particularly on social media, they're winning some of the major social media battles. They're incredibly prevalent on Twitter, X, and on TikTok. And those of us who are in more the progressive side of politics need to pay attention to that.
But they also, they are hitting people who don't respond to the polling emails and calls that you get from polling companies. And people like us here, we don't want to really necessarily think that these messages will get through. But if you look at something like net zero, we know that renewables are the economic backbone of the country for hundreds of years to come, but nobody's actually telling people that, right? So they're able to get these
net
buttons.
zero later. But I mean, today was the day that sitting SNP MSPs had to tell their party if they wanted to stand again in 2026, or at the very least be in the running for it. Now, Nicola Sturgeon, Humza Yousaf, both former First Ministers, their applications are in, although that doesn't mean they're definitely going to stand. But do you think, as former First Ministers, they should be standing in 2026, Hannah?
I don't see why not. I mean, they've got something to offer, they've got something to give, and I think it says a lot about people.
Do you think they will stand again?
I don't, well, that's not a question I can answer, that's obviously a question for them, but, you know, my sense is that, and I think we all have people in our respective parties that we've represented that have taken on leadership roles and have then taken a step back and done things within the party. I think it's important that we don't lose the expertise. We're going to have quite a lot of new MSPs across all the political parties, and I think it's really important that we have new blood and new ideas and new people, but that we also have people that have experience. And so if they want to stand, fair play to them.
You've got experience. Do you fancy being amongst them?
Well, I've put my papers in. I'm not going to.
So you could be amongst them.
I could be amongst them, but if I'm really on, and because I've not made my mind up. I mean, goodness me, the ink's barely dry on, you know, the election ballots of the last election. For me personally, I'm undecided. 9 years in Westminster was pretty brutal. A lot happened. It took a personal toll. I love politics. I loved my job. I was gutted to lose, but I'm also doing other things now, and I'm quite enjoying
that. Do you think
that.
Quite a few of your former colleagues at Westminster who lost their seats might stand?
I think there's a good chance, and I think there's a lot of my former colleagues, and you know that will be the case, I'm sure, in other parties who've got, you know, valuable experience to bring. And standing for election is a big deal. Kat knows, she was a candidate. You know, you're putting yourself forward in a job interview for tens of thousands of people. Win or lose, it's an incredible experience to go through, but it's also bruising. And so, you know, you can quite understand why, you know, people who've given something, enjoyed it, want to stand again. And equally, there might be those of us who decide, actually, no, I'm going to sit it out for a while.
Kat, you're not going to stand again, are you?
No.
Why not?
I actually just really love my job that I currently have as a solicitor, and I get to help people on a day-to-day basis and do a lot of things that really matter. So,
how hard is it for parties to find to find good candidates?
I think that it is an increasingly brutal job to have, and what you are expected to do and the things that you are asked of, from the point where you go for vetting, the point where you seek internal selection and then putting yourself forward through a campaign, and that's even before you even get the job. Then you're asked to do the job. You are working 12, 13-hour days. You are working probably 6.5 days a week. Sometimes you have to travel, you have to be away from your family. You are doing it for, and the vast majority of people who stand for election in this country do so for the best of reasons, with the best of intent, and they are genuinely trying to make a difference. But my goodness, we ask a lot of them, and it is not a particularly pleasant experience to have to go through in a lot of the situations.
You've stood before, haven't you, Andy?
I have. Yeah, I'm glad I didn't win. Not that there was much risk of it.
Would you ever do it again?
No, it's a terrible job. No, I wouldn't do it at all. And frankly, the
You're
risk...
not selling politics tonight, are you?
No, and the risk reward is not there. Right, the reality is, I mean, a lot of people say this is a very well-paid job, and I'm not dismissing the amount of money that MSPs get, but if you are looking for the absolute best of the best to be in Parliament and do these long hours and come up with ways and mechanisms and policies to improve the country, you want the best of the best, right? And we don't get them. The gene pool's not big enough. The risk reward is not there. The salary is not high enough to attract the absolutely best people. You get in there, the scrutiny is unbelievable. The toll on your family is terrible. You can't get a chicken McNugget for free without having to declare it and then be all over the newspapers for doing it. It's a dreadful job, and we need to make it much more attractive so that politicians of all parties actually want to do it, and we expand the gene pool of the good people who can go in there, because at the moment it's not good enough.
Well,
politics has, I think, terrible PR at the moment, and the few have spoiled it for the many, because as Kat says, most people go into it. Everybody I encountered almost in Westminster and in Scottish politics was there mostly for the right reasons. There were a select few who weren't, and something that we don't talk about is the constituency work. That's the backbone of what you do as a Member of Parliament. That's what drew me to it. You know, I stood in my home constituency. I got to help people that I grew up beside in the communities I grew up in, and that is an immense privilege. So we talk about the risk reward, and I think Andy's right, but the reward is great. The feeling of helping folk and them coming back to you and saying, I really appreciate you doing that.
But you don't want to do it again just now?
Well, do you know what? I'm always minded of Jim Mather, who was our first business and enterprise secretary, saying to me a long time ago, he said, you know, Hannah, I wish more people would do it for a little while, go away and do other things, and then maybe come back to it. Because having other life experience, I was out of politics for 5 years between working for the former First Minister and standing, and I did lots of other things.
Strange to mention someone who's been involved in politics, gone away and come back, because, you know, Donald Trump won and will be back in the White House next. World leaders have been congratulating him, wondering what comes next. But today, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer and French President Emmanuel Macron met in Paris. Now, you'd think that Trump would have been the talk of the steamy at the Elysee Palace, but is his election a wake-up for Liberals, Kat?
I think that it would be foolish to ignore some of the currents that ran through that election campaign and some of the outcomes of the actual election itself. I think that we are in a real era of dissatisfaction and discontent amongst voters. Whether you are low or average earnings and you feel like you haven't had a proper pay rise in over a decade, you can't afford, you're just surviving, you're not thriving, or you're at a much higher income level where you feel you're being taxed to the hilt and you're not getting any public services in return, you're trying to run a business and you're struggling to be able to do anything, and everyone seems to feel like it's broken, and that the attitude towards politicians, as we've just been discussing, feeds into that as well. And you also have, this is a particular issue in Scotland where the political consensus is very concentrated. You have a situation where there are people who just feel like they don't have their back. Nobody is speaking to them. Nobody is seeing them. And that's why they voted for
Trump, because he has their back.
Well, yeah, because they feel that they are not connected with the other offerings, and we have to be very alive to the fact that can happen. If that can happen in America after everything that Donald Trump did the first time round, then it can happen anywhere.
What about the impact on the rest of the world? I mean, you were kind of involved round about that when you worked in the North East, when he was going for the mini golf course.
Yes, I had the displeasure of dealing with Trump. The displeasure of dealing with Trump and his associates for about 3 years, and my recollection of that was just the chaos that it caused for the people who lived on the Many estate. Now, I was impartial, I was working for a politician, but I did have to engage with them.
But what about beyond that? What impact do you think it'll have on other parts of the world, on the rest of the world? On trade, for example? On trade,
the whisky industry, has huge concerns about tariffs. I think people on women's rights, on our reproductive rights, it's all, they're stealing a march on disinformation and misinformation. The relationship with Elon Musk, who's basically bought and sold the American election, it's got a phenomenal impact and knock-on impact. But it's the unpredictability, and it's the promises. He made promises in the northeast of Scotland, and they were broken almost instantly. I remember one of his representatives phoning me up and saying, "Is there anything you could do to help us give us an idea of how to deal better with the press?" And I was like, "Well, you could stop being so offensive and insulting our local constituents." And she was like, "You try telling Donald Trump what to do. The man won't be told."
Andy, is this peak populism? And what impact will that have on politics everywhere else?
Well, I think that is the biggest impact. So there will be macro impacts in terms of what he does on tariffs and all of that sort of thing. I think potentially what we'll look back on as being the biggest impact is how much the election in America changes the way that elections in other Western countries run. Now, you can see in Germany and Sweden and Italy and Switzerland and lots of other places that populism's already present, it's already alive, and it already does quite well in lots of different places. I don't think we should necessarily think that here is any different.
Does that take us back to reform then, almost?
Well, of course it does, yeah. This is all linked. All of this is linked. And I think we're at a point where high level, simplistic, they don't have to be consistent, don't have to be coherent, and it doesn't have to have a lot of depth to it. It doesn't have to have ideological or philosophical depth. We're in an era where high-level populist messages on immigration, on tax, on net zero, on those sorts of issues, they could potentially do well if they have a good messenger, and he's a brilliant messenger, you can't deny that. If there's a good messenger and the right message that hits people that people like us don't always speak to, then they could be onto something.
Kat, very briefly, do you think we're going to get a special deal for the UK with Trump?
I don't think anything is predictable about Trump apart from him being out for himself.
So you think he's just unpredictable? You think is that the biggest threat to the world then, very briefly?
Absolutely.
We've got no idea other than him being very susceptible to flattery. There's very little else that can be predicted about Donald Trump, and we will have to just see. Anyone who thinks they know what's going to happen with him don't know.
Thank you all for joining us in Scotland tonight.